This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across Africa and beyond. Let's start the program tonight with a run through the markets here for you. So the Kenyan bourse closing about 0.7% higher today, still knee-deep in the red on a year-to-date basis, however. Earlier today, Kenya's finance minister presenting some interesting proposals. He wants to more than double the capital gains tax rate from 5% to 12.5%. Now, it doesn't apply to equities and fixed income instruments under the current setup, but might that change? We'll find out once we get our hands on the 2019 finance bill. Nonetheless, if you have exposure to real estate in Kenya or you're in the PE space, expect to be hit. Here's what's coming up tonight. Finance ministers in East Africa outline their spending plans. We'll be looking at who won and who lost. We'll also be looking at the latest in South Africa as the public protector confirms a probe on the president over a campaign donation. And the French president is pushing ahead with his renewed reform drive after the Yellow Vest protests essentially fade out. Right then, quite a bit to get through tonight. Let's start in East Africa. Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania. Going to be hearing a lot about those in the next 15 minutes or so. So let's start in Kenya. The authorities over there were spending close to $30 billion in the new fiscal year that starts in about 2 weeks' time. Now, that figure is nearly $100 million more than the current budget. The Finance Secretary, Henry Rotich, presented the 2019-2020 budget proposals in Parliament with new tax measures that aim to collect about $364 extra million for the exchequer. Mr. Rotich, for example, recommended that betting firms are taxed 10% on all amounts staked. As expected, he also did increase in taxes on cigarettes and alcohol by about 15%. The education sector has received a large share of spending in the 2019-2020 budget after being allocated a total of about $206 million. The Treasury Cabinet Secretary also allocated about $545 million to free day secondary education, another $132 million set aside for the free primary education program. He also announced some relatively tough compliance measures that he says are designed to catch defaulters using technology. Right then, so what should we make of the tax measures designed to support Kenya's billion-dollar budget? Let's find out. Brian Kingeta is a partner at Anderson Tax here in Kenya. He joins me now live in studio. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So, initial impressions, what did you think?
Looks good on paper. We are looking to encourage local manufacturing, or basically keep away competition from external other countries, basically. So it looks good on paper. My concern is how do we actually ensure that these measures are implemented and we achieve the intended benefits.
And of course, there's also the question of there's maybe another shoe left to drop, because towards the end of his speech, he said, I'm going to be tabling the income tax bill that's going to be coming in whatever period of time. And the last draft that we saw of that had some pretty concerning provisions, an extra tax rate of 35% on corporate income tax, above 500 million shillings, I believe, and $7,000 a month on the personal income side. If that comes back to the floor of the House, it will be a huge negative for the economy, won't it?
It will. It will. Our CS, our government, is basically between a rock and a hard place. They need to collect as much as possible in form of tax revenue. And I'm sure that's why they're going for these increased tax rates and so on and so forth. Whether the income tax bill will actually see the day of light is a different story. My belief is that with these high tax rates, all the CS is trying to do is to collect as much as possible. Whether his colleagues on the floor will side with him, we cannot tell. We can only wait and see.
Right. There was something else he tried to do there, because we always tend to criticize the government for trying to tax a very narrow part of the economy. But as far as withholding tax is concerned, he did something interesting. So he dropped the rate from 6% down to 2%. but he also tried to apply to a much broader range of services, everything from catering to cleaning and fumigation services, and so on and so forth. What's your assessment of that?
The drop of 6% to 2% is specifically withholding VAT, where the government has appointed a few agents, mostly government agencies, who withhold an element of the VAT that you charge them.
Yeah.
So that has come down from 6% to 2%, which I think is a brilliant thing, because it then reduces the amount of VAT refunds that we have been seeking from the government. In terms of the spreading the base with the withholding tax, I think it's a good thing for the government, because what then they're trying to do is to bring as many people as possible into the tax net. But it's not a good thing for you who's the service provider, because what you'll find is that normally 5% of the gross number is bigger than 30% of your net profit.
Yeah.
So what you end up doing is you set up most of these service providers to be in a refundable position. So you end up taking more tax from them than is due actually from them. So they end up in
he's compounding that refund problem, isn't he?
Because that's more or less what will happen, because the margins are normally very small.
Yeah.
So if you take 5% of the top number, it's normally much higher than when you compare with 30% of the lower number.
He spent, I believe it was almost 15 minutes in his speech talking about the fact that suppliers have been complaining, we're not being paid by government. So that's one element of the amount of debt they just got to pay off. But the tax refund problem was something he kept going back to over and over again. And yet, later on in the speech, he comes to tax proposals and it seems he's compounding it. I mean, that seemed to be a recurring pattern in this budget.
Sometimes I think we come up with measures and we just don't look through and see what are the eventual repercussions. So probably that's a pitfall that we have with our budget. But what I do like is the commitment, which is apparent, that they indeed intend to pay the contractors as much as possible, close that up by the end of June, and then hopefully we start a new cycle come 2019, 2020 financial year.
Right, and of course, just for reference for our viewers, the fiscal year on this side of the world starts from the 1st of July up to the end of June. Food, because part of this whole big four thing, it's affordable housing, it's affordable healthcare, there's boosting manufacturing, but food is also a pretty big element of that. But this budget didn't really do much in terms of making it easier for people to actually produce food, to process food, and so on and so forth. And agriculture is huge. Bulk of GDP, biggest single employer in this country. That's a massive missed opportunity, isn't it?
It is. I'll fully agree with you on that one. He spent quite a lot of time telling us about his budget allocation in relation to the big four. If you look at the tax measures that came in through the budget, what you'll notice is that most of them are geared towards the manufacturing side of things.
Yeah.
He said nothing with regard to agriculture. If you ask me, the only thing that touched on agriculture is telling us not to export as much as possible tanned hides and skins. So you're telling us not to export tanned hides and skins, but then what do we do with them in country? You increase the export levy on that, but you don't tell us what we do with the tanned skins and hides if we don't export them. So those are the kind of pitfalls that we, like I said earlier, we just don't see through and see the repercussions of what the tax measures that we.
And also, he also raised the railway development levy, which was essentially ring-fenced, or at least the initial intent was to ring-fence it so that it pays off for the debt that we incurred in building the SGR. But in raising it to 2%, I mean, it's, you know, left hand gives, right hand takes. On one hand, I tell you, I'm going to give you a 30% rebate as a manufacturer on your power costs, which still hasn't come into effect. And on the other hand, I tell you, well, I'm going to raise your railway development levy, so your logistics costs go up. If you're in building and construction, your inputs go up. If you're in manufacturing and you're importing, you know, simple things like cabling, again, you get hit. On balance, this contradictions will do more harm than good.
The RDL, the Railway Development Levy, the beauty about that, at least if I had him correct, is that it's only the increase is focused on finished goods. So we are really not going, the intention is not to touch raw materials or intermediate goods. But yes, there's a lot of give and take, and you wonder where exactly are we heading with this? You increase the RDL, and then you tell me that you're reducing what is this? The IDF, the import declaration fees.
Yes.
So you ask yourself, what exactly are we trying to achieve? Again, another opportunity to say, are we going to do more harm than good probably. All I say about the budget is that we just need to, we need enablers. There's a lot of tax measures coming through, but we don't have the enablers to see through what exactly the intended benefits are. So you'll do one thing, but it doesn't achieve the intended benefit because the enabling provisions are not actually put in to achieve what it is that we intend to achieve.
Well, okay, we've got a few weeks to actually have this debated, so we'll see how this works out.
That's
right.
correct.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Right, that's of course Brian Kingeta there from Anderson Tax here in Kenya. I understand though we've got some breaking news. Let's go to that now. All right, then, a bit of breaking news coming into our studio at the moment. Sudan's State Prosecutor Office has said that the jailed former president of the country, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, has been charged with corruption after investigations to that end were completed. Now, the charges are entirely related to laws on suspected acquisition of illicit wealth and emergency orders, according to the State Prosecutor's Office. We'll, of course, bring you more details on that as we get them. Just to recap that story, Sudan's State Prosecutor's Office says that the jailed former president, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, has been charged with corruption after the completion of an investigation. The charges are related to laws on suspected acquisition of illicit wealth and emergency orders that he gave, according to the State Prosecutor's Office. We'll have more details on that story, of course, as they come in. Now, we've covered the Kenyan angle as far as its budget is concerned. Let's focus on her neighbour to the west, Uganda. It plans to raise its spending by over 20% from the 1st of July to $10.7 billion. The country's finance minister, Matia Kasaija, said that in Parliament that the 2019-2020 fiscal deficit will be an eye-watering 8.7% of GDP. For comparison, the figure for this year was 5.8%. He added that the government will be borrowing at least $748 million from the domestic markets in the next fiscal year. That's up from just under $600 million in 2018-2019. All right, then. So let's head over to Uganda. Government, of course, has presented those budget estimates for the fiscal year. So let's see exactly how this is going to work out. Nikhil Hira is the director at Colson Harney LLP. It's now part of the Bowman's Law Group as well. He joins us on the phone for a look at the East African budgets. Nikhil, what are the initial impressions of the spending and tax proposals from Uganda and Tanzania?
Well, Ramah, I think they're pretty similar to what we have seen in Kenya. High government expenditure, a lot being spent on infrastructure. Unfortunately, too much being spent on recurrent stuff, which doesn't necessarily help going forward. But it's very clear that all three countries have realized that we need to build up our infrastructure. And so we're seeing these huge hikes in the budget as well, and we're seeing these huge hikes in borrowing, which in the long run, particularly when we're doing in many of these countries non-concessional commercial borrowing in foreign currency, if the shilling in any of these countries deteriorates markedly, you're going to see a huge problem for the country. And I think Kenya went through that in some ways recently.
Right. Yeah, Uganda also aims to spend, as I mentioned, 23% more compared to the last fiscal year. The country's finance minister saying that the fiscal deficit will be over 8% of GDP. Surely that's not sustainable.
No, I don't think it is. And I think we've seen that in the entire region. We had approaching 8% or 7.4 or something in Kenya 2 to 3 years back. We supposedly have brought it down a little bit now. But we cannot sustain, and Uganda certainly can't sustain, an 8% budget deficit. I guess on the other side of the equation, though, is that with all their oil reserves, they're perhaps banking that whenever that comes on tap, which I don't think is going to be before 2022 or 2023, a lot of this will get wiped out at that stage.
Right.
And similarly, that would happen in Tanzania with their big gas finds if they allow it to progress.
Right. Speaking of Tanzania, though, they've proposed a range of VAT exemptions, VAT cuts, and they've also gone down the route of presumptive tax, which Kenya tinkered with in its last fiscal year. Is there anything else that has stood out for you as far as Tanzania's budget is concerned?
Well, when I look at the tax measures, there are a lot of the measures that we've seen in the entire region over the last few years, reducing exemptions. That's a trend that we've all been following and makes a bit of sense because these exemptions were tending to erode our tax bases in the region. So that makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you the one thing that struck me straight in the eye when I was going through the Tanzanian speech, and that was that they've abolished the exemption of VAT on sanitary pads, which I just couldn't fathom why they would do this. although he did say that he was concerned that they're getting the exemption, but the benefit is not going where it needs to go. So maybe the supply chain has corruption in it or something, but it did surprise me to see something like that.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Nikhil Hera from Bowman's Law. Thank you very much. Now, a quick run through a commodity producer, Africa's second largest copper producer, actually, Zambia. The authorities there say they're going to be fined and breaking ties with mining companies that fail to operate according to the country's laws. That, at least, is according to the country's president, Edgar Lungu. His remarks come amidst a dispute with India-listed Vedanta Resources. Now, Vedanta is fighting Zambia's decision last month to name a provisional liquidator to run Konkola copper mines, and it's seeking international arbitration in order to resolve that dispute. Zambia, of course, is Africa's second largest copper producer. It says that KCM breached the terms of its license. Zambia's Chamber of Mines said last month that 2019 copper output could be as much as 100,000 tons lower than last year because of changes to mining taxes. Right, then a quick run through some corporate headlines here for you. Let's start in Kenya. The telecom sector dominator, Safaricom. It's the only Kenyan enterprise listed on the prestigious Forbes Global 2000 list of 2,000 public leading companies around the world. Now, they're ranked based on their sales, the profit, their assets, the market value. 10 of the public entities over there are from South Africa, 3 are from Morocco, 2 are from Nigeria. The US-based cab-hailing company InDriver has set up shop in Kenya. The firm is known for allowing riders to bargain with their drivers. This adds to the growing number of digital taxi options available to Kenyan nationals, including Uber, Taxify, and Little. InDriver is used by 24 million people across the world in 200 cities. It will see users independently set the price for their own trips. The French-based investor Creative has acquired a stake worth $5 million in Kenya's mobile-based food delivery firm, Twiga Foods. Now, the cash injection will go towards helping the firm upscale its support to small-scale farmers in the country. Creative has invested nearly $12 billion in different companies at different stages, from venture capital to growth equity to complete buyout. And the French car manufacturer Renault sees the strengthening of its Nissan alliance as a priority after a project to merge with Fiat Chrysler failed last week. Now, the alliance between these two companies has already been shaken by the ousting of the chair, Carlos Ghosn. Renault CEO Jean-Dominique Senard said that even though trust between the two partners had deteriorated, nothing is beyond repair. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. There's anxiety in South Africa as the public protector confirms a probe on President Ramaphosa. And the president of the DRC is in Tanzania for a 2-day visit. What exactly does he hope to achieve? We'll have some answers for you live from Dar es Salaam.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoro reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to South Africa now. The rand has snapped its three-day winning streak, weakening against the dollar in early trade on Thursday. Now, this latest decline comes amid calls for the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, to respond to findings after being implicated in a probe into a donation that his campaign received from a company linked to a widespread bribery scandal. Ramaphosa reportedly received notification on the 30th of May about the preliminary outcome of this investigation, which is being carried out by the public protector, which will be finalized once he has responded. The latest anti-corruption probe against the head of state is set to increase the political uncertainty in South Africa at a time when the economy is performing rather badly. So then, let's get the latest on this story. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has been following it in great detail. He joins us now live from Johannesburg. So, Angelo, some history here. The probe, as I understand it, was requested by the leader of the DA party, the Democratic Alliance Party, Mmusi Maimane. What evidence did he present in order to trigger this inquiry?
Well, look, you'll recall a couple of months ago, Maimane stood up in Parliament waving pieces of paper around, claiming that those were copies of bank statements and documentation related and deposit slips, and he originally presented those in Parliament, so there was parliamentary privilege there. He's also using the information and the parliamentary answers that Ramaphosa presented first time round and the second time round. As you'll recall, of course, Ramaphosa the first time around said it was a payment to his son for services rendered to Bosasa at that stage. When evidence surfaced that the money actually had gone into the ANC as a donation and part of a campaign contribution, Ramaphosa then changed his answer, saying that he had no knowledge of the donation, but admitted at that point that it wasn't for services rendered by his son. So we don't know if Maimane has presented any new evidence to the public protector following this latest investigation, but it is understood that it was Ramaphosa's turnaround or U-turn that triggered the move by Maimane to actually ask the public protector to investigate this. Raman?
Right, as I understand it, the money moved from Bosasa on one hand to the ANC. So in that sense, doesn't this hinge on whether or not the president knew that the money that went into the ANC were basically the proceeds of a crime?
Well, look, the money was channeled through a Ramaphosa trust account. There's no disputing that because there is evidence there. That's as far as we're aware, at least, anyway. But it was masked by whoever at Bosasa moved that money across. So it went via several channels or several different bank accounts with different names before it got funneled into Ramaphosa's trust account. So it could be questioned whether Ramaphosa had his finger on the pulse of that account and whether he knew about the daily deposits and transfers that were happening. So probably not would be the general consensus there. Would he have known who Bosasa was at the time of the donation? Well, that's more likely. Would a reasonable person, of course, including the president, have known that the cash may have been derived from an alleged criminal activity? Well, that all in fact, those are all questions that have to be answered. They're theoretical at the moment, and they will have to be tested in court. And based on the approach that Ramaphosa's predecessor has taken, if it does go to court, it's going to be dragged out for years and years to come. So, and that's if it actually gets to that point, Raman.
Right. What did the president know, and when did he know it? That's a key question here. So the president, as I understand it, is also asked to cross-examine some of the individuals that are being used as witnesses by the public protector, and he's got until the 21st of June to respond. Can that happen between now and then?
Well, look, I've looked at the public statements from both sides. First, when the public protector issued her announcement, and secondly, the response by the president. And it's unclear at the moment. Ramaphosa has 8 days in which to get his administration or his admin sorted out, and it's unlikely that's going to happen. And it's also unlikely that his legal team are going to have time between yesterday and next week to actually call on and cross-examine all those witnesses, including Mr. Maimane. So it's expected he will probably respond to the new deadline, but it's unlikely that his legal team will have had time to do what they needed to do. So it looks like there's an extension in the works there. And of course, just remember, if there's an unwilling or hostile witness, they can drag this thing out for weeks and months. In terms of Maimane, well, his people told me this afternoon that they haven't received any official request yet to be cross-examined by Ramaphosa's legal team. And in any event, they've also indicated that if they are called on to go under cross-examination, they're going to take legal advice to see if they should or shouldn't present themselves. So it's likely to cause another delay, Raman.
Indeed. One last question for you, Angela. We like this sort of scenario planning at this program. So let's say, for argument's sake, the public protector makes an adverse finding against Mr. Ramaphosa. What's the worst that could happen?
Well, look, the only law that we've been able to ascertain that he could be found guilty of at the moment is the Parliamentary Members' Ethics Code. There's a sanction in there that really is a slap on the wrist if a Member of Parliament or the President or the Vice President are found to have lied. But it's really a slap on the hand. In terms of potential corruption charges, defeating the ends of justice, or possibly money laundering, well, that's obviously going to be dependent on what the National Prosecution's boss and the Hawks decide that they're going to do. There would be jail time involved there if that goes down that path. Whether any of this actually happens, of course, remains to be seen, because there has to be a political will and appetite. The first step will obviously be to deal with the Public Protector's inquiry and the subsequent final report, and then they take it from there. But let's bear in mind that the Public Protector hasn't had a great run in terms of her officer's reports or recommendations, most of which have been challenged in court and either overturned or dismissed. So this may all be a little bit premature, Raman.
Indeed, we'll see how it all plays out. Thank you for the update. That's Angela Coppola there live in Johannesburg. Now, we're still in South Africa though. Cape Town is turning to work placement platforms and the private sector in order to reduce youth unemployment. The economic hub recently invested about $500,000 into its Cape Town Information Technology Initiative. It's designed to train young people, give them digital skills that they need to survive, and these individuals are coming from disadvantaged areas. With the details, here's CGTN's Travis Andrews.
It's a common sight often seen in marginalized communities throughout the city. Unemployed youth in a desperate search for jobs and opportunities. But for some, those days are slowly changing. That's because when it comes to the youth, the city is rolling up its sleeves and turning to work placement platforms such as Lulaway to create jobs for young people. It's also decided to make sustainable job creation partnerships with the private sector and outcomes-based work development venture.
What we did with this tender, instead of saying we want to see certain kind of outputs, as in you've got to do certain kinds of training, you've got to do certain kinds of things like that, we actually said we're going to measure you on the outcomes. And those outcomes have to be employment. So we don't just want to see you train people for training's sake. We want to see you actually train people and then place them into work. And the longer that they are then placed into work, the more that you will then get paid as a service provider.
With an unemployment rate of around 24%, it's easy to see why the city is taking a somewhat different approach to job creation. For many of these youth, it has to start somewhere. And with more than 30,000 job seekers already finding employment on the company's online youth employment engine, using innovation has become one of the key successes.
Job seekers were in the townships, opportunities were usually outside of the townships, and information about jobs, access to jobs, the opportunity to apply for jobs was quite divided. There was limited access, so we realized that we needed some sort of infrastructure in the townships linked to some sort of tech platform.
The platform also has companies which are affiliated to its database and provide immediate placements to suitable candidates in posts in the retail, government and security sectors.
We've already seen over 2,000 people actually being employed through this process. So it has spoken to a huge need that's out there to try and match unemployed people with potential employers. So this is certainly something that we see as a huge success, and we certainly want to encourage it going forward.
But it's not just the entry-level work environment that the city and the private sector hope to change. because successful candidates often end up giving back, sharing their knowledge and experiences with a new batch of candidates who hope to go even further in exciting new career paths. It is by no means an easy task taking the youth off the streets and into jobs, but the collective action of stakeholders such as the government, municipalities and the private sector is beginning to pay dividends, so that youth employment opportunities can be aligned with the growth of the broader economy. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
The President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, has arrived in Tanzania for a two-day official visit. This is the first state visit for Mr. Tshisekedi ever since he was elected as head of state. Tanzania and the DRC have a very long-running history of cultural, social and economic cooperation. Tshisekedi is expected to discuss how to improve cooperation between his nation and Tanzania with his counterpart, President John Pombe Magufuli. The scheduled meeting between the two leaders is set to focus on strengthening economic activities between the two by enhancing the use of the port of Dar es Salaam for both imports and exports. Let's get to the latest on that state visit. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has been covering it. He joins us now live from Dar es Salaam. So, Daniel, infrastructure, one of the key topics that will be covered in these bilateral talks. What exactly is the DRC looking for from her eastern neighbor?
Hello, Ramah. Indeed, you said it that Tanzania and the Congo have shared a long relationship of culture, social and economic exchange. Now, Congolese and the Tanzania business communities have been trading for a very long time. Now, as it stands, all indicators point that these two presidents are indeed looking to strengthen the trade relations between these two countries. Touching on infrastructure, as you said, we know that last year Tanzania had cancelled the single customs territory agreement with the DRC. So many trade experts believe that now these two presidents are looking for alternatives to facilitate trade routes. You know, items like improving roads and border infrastructure, reducing the multiplication of border clearance processes that sometimes leads to long delays at the border. You know, reducing extortion, high taxes, multiple unofficial roadblocks on the roads leading between the port and DRC. So all these are possible points of discussions that would possibly lead to a better trade relationship between these two countries.
Indeed. I'm glad you brought up that single customs territory arrangement between Tanzania and the DRC. Tell us what it was and why it was ended.
So yes, last year the government gave notice to all clearing and forwarding agents, importers, exporters that, the special single customs territory agreement between Tanzania and the DRC, where, certain products like fuel, cooking oil, wheat, maize, motor vehicles were treated differently. Now, they informed these players that the deal was over. Now the execution of the SCT agreement faced challenges. It saw DRC business community complaining that there were delays of transporting and processing their goods. They were increasing. The Tanzanian port officials noticed that DRC business community was increasingly preferring to use other ports like Mombasa in Kenya, Beira in Mozambique, and Durban in South Africa. Now this resulted to a serious drop in cargo passing at the Dar es Salaam port. The business community also complained that sometimes the clearing took from 2 to 3 months. This consequently affected them seriously, raising costs because of storage charges and other lost revenues. Now, in fact, a 2016 report by the Bank of Tanzania reported that goods that were transported from Dar es Salaam port to DRC that passed through Dar es Salaam port dropped by 12.7% over a 6-month period following these complications because of the CST agreement. So it seems the agreement was not working for both parties.
Indeed. So the president of the DRC, Mr. Tshisekedi, he's expressed an interest. I'm sure you've seen the letter that he sent to the Rwandese president, Paul Kagame. So he's expressed an interest in joining the East African Community Trade Bloc. Has he pitched that idea to President Magufuli? And if he has, what's the response?
Well, we are not very sure on exactly what the two presidents have discussed, but as it stands, Ramah, indeed, yes, the DRC wants to be the 7th member of the East African Community. Just a couple of days ago, in fact, specifically the 8th of June, the DRC president wrote a letter to President Paul Kagame, who is the current president of the East African Community Bloc, asking to join. He said that decision has come due to the increasing trade between his country and other EAC country members. He then finished by asking the President Kagame to kindly present his intention to other East African counterparts counterparts and DRC's passion to contribute to the development of the region. Now, as you know, the DRC is nicknamed the Giant of Africa, totaling over 2.3 million square kilometers with over 80 million inhabitants. So it is a big trade partner to the whole East African community. So as it stands, we know that President Magufuli has shown his dedication for the growth and of the East African region and regional trade. So we wait to see exactly what he says tomorrow when we meet them, we hear from them again, but we expect he would welcome the idea.
Indeed. One last question for you. The Ebola outbreak on the eastern end of the DRC, it's killed at least 1,000 people. It's been going on for a while now. It's spread into Uganda, 2 people there. What's the response from Tanzanian health authorities?
Well, Rama, the Minister of Health for Tanzania, Honorable Umi Mwalimu, has released a statement through her Twitter account asking Tanzanians to remain calm and not to worry over the possibility of the Ebola virus spreading into Tanzania. This is after reports that it had spread from the DRC into Congo. We know, as you said, in the DRC, the virus is said to have killed up to 1,400 people already. The Minister for Health said the government is doing everything to ensure that all people crossing from the different entry points into Tanzania do not bring the infections into the country. So as it stands, Tanzania says it's prepared to handle the virus if there are any challenges arising at the borders, etc.
Indeed. Daniel Kijo in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. We'll certainly hear from you tomorrow on the conclusion of that state visit. Thank you. Now, on to Africa's youngest country. President Salva Kiir has appointed a new oil minister in the wake of a cabinet reshuffle. The Ministry of Petroleum and Mining does play a critical role in that country's economy because it derives nearly all of government revenues from the sale of one product, oil. From the capital, Juba, here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet.
Ezekiel Lol Gatquote is credited with South Sudan's resumption of oil production in the oil fields destroyed by a 6-year civil war. Oil revenues are crucial to South Sudan's attempt to rebuild its economy. Mr. Ezekiel has also been a link between Juba and Khartoum. He met with the Transitional Military Council in Khartoum several times to try and make sure oil flows from South Sudan to Port Sudan and onto the international market. President Salva Kiir has not given any reasons for sacking Mr. Ezekiel. His spokesperson only says it is the routine duty of the president to sack or appoint government officials. Mr. Ezekiel was brought to the ministry under the current first Vice President Taban Dengai after falling out with opposition leader Riek Machar under the 2015 peace arrangement. Awo Daniel Chuang, who was a Director General at the Ministry of Petroleum, has been appointed to replace Ezekiel Lol. South Sudan's Ministry of Petroleum says the country's total oil production is currently 180,000 barrels a day. The government says it aims to reach pre-war levels of 350 to 400,000 barrels a day by mid-2020. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. President Emmanuel Macron pushes ahead with his reform drive after the Yellow Vest protests peter out. And General Motors invests $150 million to improve a truck production plant in Flint, Michigan.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business Africa. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. An estimated 50 people have been killed in attacks between two rival ethnic groups at a place called Jugu in Ituri province in the eastern end of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, there are conflicting reports about the death toll, however. The government says 38 people died. Human Rights Watch, however, says at least 50 people were killed. In Uganda, a second Ebola patient has died. The 50-year-old was part of the family of a young boy, a 5-year-old, who died on Wednesday after testing positive for the deadly hemorrhagic virus. The family had crossed into Uganda from the border with the DRC. Authorities say 2 other people at this point are in intensive care, while all the people who have been in contact with the family have been tracked down and they are being monitored. Sudan's military council has explained the reason for a major security reshuffle that took place this week. In a statement, the Transitional Military Council said some 70 officers had apparently been planning a coup against the head of the military, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. And finally, Zimbabwe's government is now demanding to sell off part of an estimated $300 million ivory stockpile in order to help fund conservation efforts. It has submitted a joint proposal with 3 other African countries to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, calling for the relaxation of restrictions on the sale of ivory. That's a run through your headlines. Right, and away from the African continent now. As France's Yellow Vest protests finally quiets down, the country's president is pushing ahead with a potentially explosive reform agenda that includes tax cuts and changes to unemployment benefits. Some of these measures were already key planks of his modernization program, but they had been postponed by 6 months of demonstrations. Take a look at the new measures.
In a renewed reform drive by President Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe told lawmakers that they would be moving ahead with plans to reduce unemployment benefits for high earners and offer incentives to those who work beyond normal retirement age. The new measures will include commitments to put the environment and social justice at the heart of policy making between now and the end of Macron's mandate in 2021.
This is Act 2 of the presidential term. The next step marks a break with a profound change in method and 2 requirements: consistency and coherence. The only 2 things our country has never tried.
Philippe also stressed that in spite of recent protests surrounding Macron's economic plan, unemployment is now at a 10-year low, investment is at a 12-year high, and purchasing power in the country is rising. But despite these positive numbers, Macron had become widely unpopular amongst blue-collar workers and those struggling to make a living. And that's due to tax cuts for big business and the wealthy and reforms to loosen labor laws. Opposition to fuel tax increases and the growing perception that the former investment banker is arrogant also sparked anti-Macron protests, and they're known as the Yellow Vest movement. However, the movement has slowly died down today, from more than 300,000 people in the first weeks to now barely a 15,000 turnout.
If he announces tax-bashing measures and punitive green measures, the Yellow Vest movement can of course take off again. What the French are waiting for is common sense. On environment, they want local food production for local consumption. Today, you have free trade agreements which are a threat to our agriculture. French people are expecting measures to improve their buying power, because that's what the Yellow Vest crisis started on. There's also our public services which are being taken away, especially in small towns, with schools and hospitals closing. And the government needs to give us an answer on that.
The country has calmed down compared to 6 months ago, but I worry about the government taking us into an impasse, especially a budgetary impasse. The announcements which were made to calm the Yellow Vest movement hasn't been financed. There will be a point when we need to find the money, either by increasing taxes. The government is considering a tax increase for companies, and it's worrying because it will weigh on the country's competitiveness, or by increasing our debt, which I fear our government might fall for this easy way out.
While Macron's popularity ratings are still low, they have picked up about 5 points to 32% in the last Elabe poll from the Les Echos newspaper. That's a level unseen since last summer. A string of good economic news, including a dip in the number of jobless and higher consumer and business morale, have also lifted the president's spirits. Ucheo Korongwo, CGTN.
The American carmaker General Motors is investing about $150 million into its facility in Flint, Michigan, to boost the production of heavy-duty trucks. This move follows the company's last announcement last month that it will be investing another $24 million into its production plant in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to help expand light-duty truck production. GM has placed more than $1.6 billion into the Flint assembly plant since 2013, and that in turn has allowed that plant's production capacity in the all-new Chevrolet and GMC heavy-duty trucks to go up by about 40,000 vehicles a year. That includes more crew cab models and a lot more diesels. This new investment is expected to enhance the plant's conveyors and other tooling once it's completed in the first half of 2020.
Today we are celebrating some great news from GM for Flint and for our terrific assembly facility here. I'm pleased to announce that General Motors is investing another $150 million in this facility to increase production for the all-new, for the production of the Chevrolet Silverado and GMC Sierra heavy-duty pickup trucks, which began shipping to dealers this week, Monday. Big emotional day in this plant, so we are shipping to commerce. This is the second major expansion of our full-size pickup truck production capacity this year. Just last month, we announced $24 million investment increase in our Fort Wayne plant to expand light-duty full-size pickup production capacity, and that is in response to an unbelievable customer demand so far for the T1 light duties.
China's Commerce Ministry has reported the latest data on the nation's foreign trade. Here's the perspective from the ministry spokesman, Gao Feng, responding to statements from the U.S. about trade tensions between the U.S. and China.
China's imports and exports to the United States fell by 9.6% in the first 5 months of 2019, according to the latest report from the Ministry of Commerce. Another sign that shows no one wins in a trade war.
Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
It was the U.S. that was not honest in the consultations and unilaterally upgraded trade friction, which led to serious setbacks in the negotiations. If the U.S. insists on unilateralism and wants to force China to yield, this will never succeed.
U.S. President Donald Trump recently said that China's economy has been seriously hurt by the tariffs. He added that companies are leaving China to avoid paying them. Put another way, he was implying China's attraction for investing was weakened by the tariffs he imposed earlier. While in fact, according to the latest official data, in the first 5 months of this year, China's actual use of foreign capital saw an increase of 3.7% year-on-year. And manufacturing utilization of foreign investment increased by 8.3%.
These data demonstrate the strong confidence of foreign investors in the Chinese economy and the Chinese market. China is still the most attractive investment hotspot in the world.
Gao said he also noticed recent research from JP Morgan Chase Bank, Goldman Sachs, and other institutions, which have shown that the cost of U.S. tariffs has been passed on to U.S. importers, retailers, and consumers. Chuck Tinta, CGTN.
Let's move on to the world of tech now. From self-aware computers to robots, there's no doubt that artificial intelligence, machine learning, data revolution, these are all things that are changing our lives. But how exactly is it changing business and social activity in the UK? CGTN's Jamie Owen caught up with the British Secretary of State for Digital Media and Sport at this year's London Tech Week to find out.
Artificial intelligence certainly makes my brain hurt. There's lots of massages here at this conference in the middle of London that is investigating and showcasing artificial intelligence. Wherever you're watching this, artificial intelligence is going to be a huge part of all of our lives. Not just changing the way we have healthcare, changing education, changing the way we work, but also changing life at home. This place, as you would expect, is absolutely jam-packed with people trying to sell you stuff. Car manufacturers, apartments, software, computers, financial services. One of the big questions that hangs in the air at this conference is who looks after all of that data? Data runs artificial intelligence. So who runs looking after your private data, your private financial data, your private health data. I've been talking to the UK government minister responsible for artificial intelligence, Jeremy Wright, and asking him some of those questions.
And I think what we've seen is technological development in the past running a long way ahead of the rules and regulations that need to surround that. And what I think we're going to do with artificial intelligence, to take it as an example, is try to do things differently. And it's very important for artificial intelligence's development and for its acceptance by most people around the world that we have an ethical framework that surrounds the technology. And that means that people can be confident that the data, the information that drives artificial intelligence will be properly used, properly protected, and that people will know when they're talking to someone who is a real human being or when they're effectively talking to a machine. That's hugely important if we want people to trust this technology, and trusting it is essential to allowing it to do the most effective things it can to improve our lives. Well, let me give you an example of how we're improving that track record. So part of my responsibilities are to look at the way in which the internet more broadly, social media, search engines can be made safer for people to use. There's a gap at the moment, I think people are becoming increasingly conscious of it, between the regulation, the control of bad behaviour that exists for broadcast media, for example, print media, behaviour on the streets, the difference between what's controlled there and what isn't controlled online. We need to do something about that, and the British government is doing something about that. So we're bringing forward proposals to impose what we call a duty of care on all online companies that deal with user-generated content, and to say to those companies, you have a responsibility to keep your users as safe as you reasonably can, and we will need a regulator to hold those companies to account for any failures under that duty of care. Now that's an attempt to address exactly the gap you're talking about. And the response from the companies is, I think, broadly to accept that the time has come for self-regulation in this area to end and for the government to take a role. Only governments can legislate and then regulate, and governments should.
Right, then a quick run through commodity prices for you. So Brent crude, that's our focus, slightly off the high of 62.64 we've seen so far. But even today at 16.24 GMT, even at the levels that we saw then, it was actually slightly lower than this, 61.27. It's still 2% higher. US crude spiked way higher, rising by as much as 4.5% because two tankers were attacked and the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway between Saudi Arabia and Iran that handles about 20% of global oil traffic. All the hikes you're seeing at the moment are primarily because of that attack. We'll keep you posted on the latest. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore the ways in which Senegal is trying to promote organic food producers. All that and more is coming up shortly. Welcome back. Now, every first Saturday of the month between December and June, Senegal holds the Dakar Farmers Market. The farmers and craftsmen market played host to around 100 exhibitors this time around, and they're all looking to market and sell their products. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangare with more on Grassroots tonight.
About 150 exhibitors offered a wide range of quality natural food and cosmetic products. The Dakar Farmers Market aims to promote local consumption and better living. For many craftsmen, this platform is also an opportunity to increase their turnover.
We have organic honey with different flavors, including mango, cinnamon, and ginger. Dakar Farmers Market is an interesting event which allows us to earn money and make our company known.
I am in the local fruits processing business. These products are free of additives and preservatives. They only contain fruit and sugar. I am pleased and happy to be at the Dakar Farmers Market, a market that promotes local consumption.
Exclusive to organic made-in-Senegal companies, Dakar Farmers Market was established by Dr. Kamo Kane, who got the inspiration after attending a farmers market in the US.
While in the United States, I went to visit a farmer's market and I really liked the concept. That is, this aspect of a community event around local producers. Later, I had the idea of reproducing it in Dakar. We started with 25 exhibitors in 2015. Today, we have an average of about 150 exhibitors per market. In the beginning, there were about 100 visitors, but we now have 3,000 to 4,000 visitors per market. Thanks to this market, several local companies involved in product processing have now become known.
Dakar Farmers Market is now in its 4th season. In addition to the seasonal event, the organizers plan to proceed with the online sale of their products in the coming days. The next market will be held next December for the 2019-2020 season. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
On to South America now, Chile to be exact. It's one of the most established wine producers on the planet. Its wines have been attracting enthusiasts from across the world for decades. But producers are now breaking new ground by going back to traditional methods to upgrade their product. Here's CGTN's Joel Richards with more.
Chile is one of the most established wine producers in the world. Yet in regions like this, the industry is doing something quite different from other wine-producing countries. It is literally going back to its roots.
This is not one of Chile's most important wine-producing regions. Forestry is by far the most important industry here. But there are a number of people working to restore vineyards that were planted centuries ago and also start introducing old winemaking techniques once again.
At San Roque Winery, they used to mix all the grapes from their land to produce one single wine. Yet with the help of specialists, they discovered that in amongst these old vines, they had many different grapes, including Malbec, a grape better known from Argentina than Chile.
This is the oldest Malbec in Chile and South America. This one, right here.
Here they're sticking to old techniques with their winemaking as they develop different wines.
We don't use any chemicals at all in our ancient vines. We have kept the vineyards just as how they were planted. And the way we harvest is the same as 150 years ago.
Many other small vineyards are rediscovering and rebranding century-old wines all along the length of this country. Max Morales has been investigating these old vineyards for a number of years. He's hoping to attract international investment to develop long-forgotten vineyards and boost regional economies.
With that process, Chile became, with Australia, the two leading countries producing and experimenting how to rescue these vines because nobody had any particular strategy. And then over 50 wineries from Chile are producing wines coming from grapes that they are over 100 years, 150 years old.
Some of these unique wineries, including San Roque, are hoping to expand their business. And like the major players in Chile's wine export industry, Christian and his father are looking to China.
We will be looking at a small amount to start, 1,000 bottles to start off with. And then the idea is to continue growing.
San Roque can produce about 20,000 bottles a year. Most of the other so-called new ancient wineries produce less, but these vineyards create wines and flavours not found anywhere else in the world. Joel Richards, CGTN, San Rosendo, Chile.
All right, then, a quick run through the currencies here for you. So despite the conversation we had a little earlier about the South African rand and the situation and the president, the rand did actually post some very marginal gains within the course of the trading session today. 14.88 at 16:21 GMT. At those levels, it's barely a tenth of a percent lower so far in the day. What will be of interest to traders, however, moving forward, the fact that the Reserve Bank thinks there's room for rate cuts somewhere in the next 24 to 48 months. Those are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here on the program in the last hour. There are plenty of ways to get your views back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.